When a daughter is worth more dead than alive, what happens when she refuses to die? Serena Caldwell never imagined her own father would sell her to Miami's most dangerous crime lord, with a $10 million insurance policy betting she wouldn't last the week. Bruised, silenced, and trained to accept violence as love, she walked into Dominic Valenti's world expecting to vanish. Instead, she found the one man powerful enough to help her do something far more terrifying than survival. She could fight back. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches. The rain came down like bullets on the roof of the Lincoln Town Car, each drop exploding against metal with the kind of violence that made Serena flinch. She sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, the bruises on her wrists turning purple beneath the sleeves of the coat her father had insisted she wear. Navy blue cashmere. Expensive. As if quality fabric could hide what he'd done. Stop fidgeting. Richard Caldwell's voice cut through the drum of rain without him bothering to turn around. He sat in the passenger seat, phone pressed to his ear, conducting business as though his daughter wasn't being delivered like cargo to a man whose name made seasoned criminals cross themselves. Serena stilled her hands, breathing hurt, 2 cracked ribs from 3 nights ago when she'd tried to refuse dinner, when she'd said she wasn't hungry in a tone he'd deemed disrespectful. Her father had very specific ideas about respect. They usually involved his fists and her silence. The driver, Marcus, one of her father's security team who'd watched her grow up and never once intervened, met her eyes in the rearview mirror. For a second, she thought she saw something that might have been pity. Then he looked away, and she remembered that pity without action was just another form of cruelty. "We're here," Marcus said. The estate rose out of the Miami darkness like something from a different century. Iron gates, stone walls, architecture that whispered old money and older secrets. The Valenti compound. Serena had heard the stories. Everyone in Miami had. Dominic Valenti ran the city's underworld with a precision that terrified his enemies and impressed his allies. He didn't make mistakes. He didn't show mercy. And according to her father's gleeful explanation during the drive, he'd just purchased a very specific debt. Her. "Remember what we discussed," Richard said, finally turning to face her. His expression held all the warmth of a business transaction, which, Serena supposed, was exactly what this was. "You do what he says. You don't embarrass me. You certainly don't come crawling back." She wanted to laugh, as if she'd ever been welcome to come back, as if home had ever been anything other than a beautiful prison with a monster at its center. "Yes, father." The words tasted like ash. They always did. Marcus opened her door, umbrella already raised against the downpour. Serena stepped out, her ribs screaming protest, and tried not to think about how her father hadn't even bothered to get out of the car, hadn't bothered with a goodbye. Just sat there scrolling through his phone as if he'd just dropped off dry cleaning. The front door of the estate opened before they reached it. A man stood in the doorway, older, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. He looked at Serena with an expression she couldn't quite read, then shifted his gaze to Marcus. "Mr. Caldwell isn't coming in?" "He has other appointments," Marcus said. The lie sat between them, obvious and unchallenged. Everyone knew Richard Caldwell wouldn't set foot in Dominic Valenti's home. Men like her father wielded power through lawyers and politicians and careful distance from anything that might stain their reputations. Men like Valenti were the stains they paid others to create. "I'm Victor," the silver-haired man said to Serena, "head of household. Mr. Valenti is expecting you." Behind her, she heard the town car pulling away. No hesitation, no backward glance. Just the sound of tires on wet gravel and then nothing but rain. "This way, please." Victor led her through a foyer that belonged in a museum. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that was probably worth more than her father's entire quarterly earnings. The kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself because it had been there for generations. They climbed a staircase that curved like a spine, each step making Serena's damaged ribs sing with pain she couldn't show. She'd learned young that showing pain only encouraged more of it. Better to breathe shallow, move careful, let her face show nothing at all. Victor stopped at a door near the end of a long hallway. He knocked twice, waited for a response Serena couldn't hear, then opened it. "Miss Caldwell, sir." "Thank you, Victor." The voice that answered was deeper than she'd expected, rougher around the edges, like whiskey and smoke. Serena stepped through the doorway and Victor closed it behind her with a soft click that sounded remarkably final. The office was all dark wood and leather, bookshelves lining the walls, a massive desk positioned to catch the rain-streaked window light. And behind that desk sat Dominic Valenti. He was younger than the stories suggested, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair and darker eyes that tracked her movement with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie, the kind of casual that only came from absolute confidence. There was a scar along his jawline, faint but visible, and his hands, currently folded on the desk in front of him, bore the kind of scars that came from using them as weapons. Sit. It wasn't a request. Serena moved to the chair across from his desk and lowered herself into it, moving slowly to avoid jarring her ribs. His eyes narrowed slightly, tracking the care in her movement, but he said nothing. For a long moment, he just looked at her, not the way men usually looked at her, not with hunger or possession or the clinical assessment of an object being evaluated for purchase. He looked at her the way someone might study a puzzle they were trying to solve. "Your father," Dominic said finally, "is a piece of shit." The words hit her like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Because no one had ever said them out loud before. In her world, Richard Caldwell was untouchable. Philanthropist, businessman, pillar of Miami society. The man who wrote checks to children's hospitals and sat on charity boards and smiled for cameras while his daughter learned to hide bruises. "I know," she said. It came out before she could stop it, 2 words that felt like treason. Her father's first rule: never speak against him. Never let anyone see the cracks in the perfect family facade. Dominic's expression shifted, something that might have been approval, or possibly just surprise that she'd spoken at all. "He owed me money," Dominic continued, "a significant amount. When he couldn't pay, he offered me you instead. Called it settling a debt with interest." His jaw tightened just slightly. "I've been in this business a long time, Serena. I've seen a lot of terrible things. But watching a man sell his own daughter like she's property that's depreciated in value, that was a new low. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she was supposed to say anything at all. In her experience, men like Dominic Valenti didn't actually want conversation. They wanted compliance. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You're going to stay here. Victor will show you to your room. You'll have access to the entire estate, the library, the gardens, anywhere you want to go. You need something, you ask. You want something, you ask. You want to leave, you tell me, and I'll have someone drive you anywhere in the city." Serena stared at him. This had to be a trick, some kind of test. "I don't understand." "Which part?" "Any of it." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "You paid for me. I'm supposed to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say out loud what she'd been expecting when she walked through those gates. Dominic's expression went cold, but not at her, at something else. "Let me be very clear. You're not here to service me. You're not property. You're not a possession. Your father made a business decision that involved you. I made a business decision that removed you from his reach. That's the extent of the transaction." "Then what do you want from me?" "Right now." He stood, moving to the window overlooking the rain-soaked grounds. "I want you to answer a question." Serena's throat went tight. Questions were dangerous. Questions led to tests, and tests led to failures, and failures led to, "Who did this to you?" She blinked. "What?" He turned to face her, and his expression was different now. Harder. The kind of hard that came from controlled fury rather than casual cruelty. "The way you move. The way you breathe. Someone hurt you, and recently." His voice dropped lower. "Who?" The truth sat in her throat like broken glass. She'd learned to swallow it down, to pretend the bruises came from clumsiness, that the fractures were accidents. That was the agreement, unspoken but absolute. Silence in exchange for survival. But sitting in this dark office with rain hammering the windows and a dangerous man asking her a question no one had ever asked before, something in her cracked. "My father." The words fell into the space between them like stones into deep water. Dominic didn't move, didn't react. Just watched her with those dark eyes, until she thought she might shatter under the weight of being actually seen. How long? Always. Her voice was barely a whisper. As long as I can remember. He has very specific rules about how things should be. I've never been good at following them. What happened 3 days ago? Ice shot through her veins. How did you? You're favoring your left side, moving like you've got broken ribs. That kind of injury is about 3 days old, maybe 4. He crossed his arms. What did you do that he decided deserved that? The casual way he asked it, like he was inquiring about the weather, somehow made it worse, made it real. I said I wasn't hungry, she said, at dinner. He was entertaining clients and I wasn't feeling well and I said I wasn't hungry. He decided that was disrespectful. Disrespectful, Dominic repeated, his tone flat. To refuse food when he'd paid for it. To show weakness in front of his guests. She stopped herself. This was insane. She was sitting in a crime lord's office explaining why her father was right to beat her. I shouldn't have argued. You're defending him. I'm explaining, but you're defending him, Dominic said again, his voice harder now. You're sitting here with cracked ribs talking about disrespect like that justifies what he did to you. Serena felt something hot and sharp rise in her chest. Anger, maybe, or possibly just the exhaustion of pretending for so long. What else am I supposed to do? The words came out louder than she meant them to. He's my father. He raised me. He's a coward who hits people who can't hit back, Dominic interrupted. That's not raising someone, that's breaking them. The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. She looked away, focusing on the rain-streaked window, trying to find her breath around the sudden tightness in her chest. I need you to understand something, Dominic said, moving back to his desk. He sat on the edge of it, close enough that she had to look up to see his face. You're safe here. That's not conditional. That's not dependent on you being useful or obedient or anything else. You're safe because I say you are, and in this house, what I say is law. Why? The question burst out of her. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I'm nothing to you except what? A debt payment? His jaw tightened. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Serena. I see someone who's spent her whole life being told she deserves pain. Someone who's been trained to make herself smaller so she doesn't inconvenience the people who should be protecting her. Someone who's survived something that should have destroyed her and is still sitting here trying to figure out what she did wrong. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping but somehow becoming more intense. You didn't do anything wrong. Your father did. Every single time he raised a hand to you, every time he made you believe you deserved it, that was his failure, not yours. Serena felt something crack behind her ribs, something that had nothing to do with the physical damage. Tears burned in her throat, but she forced them down. Crying was weakness. Weakness invited punishment. I don't understand you, she whispered. You don't have to, not yet. Dominic straightened, moving back around his desk. Victor will show you to your room. There are clothes in the closet, should fit. Bathroom stocked with whatever you might need. You hungry? The question was so normal, so casual, that it took her a moment to process it. I don't know. When's the last time you ate? She tried to remember. Breakfast? No, she'd skipped that. Dinner 2 nights ago, before her father. I'm not sure. Something dangerous flashed across Dominic's face, gone so quickly she almost missed it. Victor will bring you something. You don't have to eat it if you don't want to, but it'll be there. He pressed a button on his desk phone. You need anything else? There's a phone in your room. Extension 9 reaches Victor, Extension 1 reaches me. Day or night, doesn't matter. You use it. The door opened and Victor appeared, his timing so perfect that Serena wondered if he'd been waiting in the hallway. Miss Caldwell's room, please. And have Maria prepare a plate. Nothing heavy, something gentle on the stomach. Of course, sir. Serena stood carefully, her ribs protesting the movement. She made it halfway to the door before Dominic's voice stopped her. Serena. She turned back. Your father doesn't get to touch you again. Ever. That's not a promise. That's a fact. Whatever else happens, whatever you decide to do, that part is done. You understand? She wanted to believe him. Wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But belief was a luxury she'd learned to live without. Yes, she said anyway. Because maybe, In this house, with rain falling like ammunition and a dangerous man making impossible promises, maybe she could learn to lie to herself in a different way. Maybe she could pretend to believe until belief became real. Victor led her down hallways that felt like they went on forever, past rooms she couldn't imagine filling, to a door near the end of the east wing. He opened it and stepped aside. The room was larger than her entire bedroom at her father's house. Four-poster bed, sitting area with a fireplace, French doors leading to what looked like a private balcony. The kind of space that belonged to someone important, someone valued. "The closet is through there," Victor said, gesturing to a door on the left. "Bathroom through there. If anything doesn't fit or you need something different, just let me know. I'll have Maria bring up a plate in about 20 minutes. I don't need—" Mr. Valenti was quite clear, Victor interrupted gently. "It'll be waiting whether you eat it or not. No pressure, no judgment." He left her standing in the middle of the room, alone with furniture that cost more than she was worth, and silence that felt heavier than any words. Serena moved to the French doors and opened them, stepping out onto a balcony that overlooked gardens she could barely see through the rain. The air smelled like wet earth and jasmine. She breathed it in, let it fill her damaged lungs, and tried to understand what had just happened. Her father had sold her to a monster. That part made sense, that was just Richard Caldwell being who he'd always been, practical and cruel in equal measure. But the monster had given her a room like this, had asked who hurt her, had promised safety like it was something he could deliver with the same certainty he probably delivered violence. She didn't understand it, didn't trust it, couldn't let herself believe it was real, because if she believed, and it turned out to be another trap, another test, another lesson in how stupid she was to hope. The door opened behind her. Serena turned, expecting Victor, but it was a woman instead. Older, maybe 50, with kind eyes and calloused hands carrying a tray that smelled like soup and fresh bread. "Miss Caldwell, I'm Maria. I manage the household kitchen." She set the tray on the small table near the fireplace. "I brought chicken soup and some plain toast. Easy on the stomach if you haven't been eating regular." "Thank you," Serena said automatically. Maria studied her for a moment, that same look Victor had given her, like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. "You need anything else? You just call down. Extension 7 reaches the kitchen direct." "I don't want to be any trouble." "Honey," Maria said, and her voice was soft enough that it almost hurt. "You're not trouble. You're a guest. There's a difference." She left before Serena could argue, and Serena was alone again with a tray of food she didn't deserve, in a room she hadn't earned, and a situation that made absolutely no sense. She approached the tray cautiously. The soup was still steaming, the bread cut into neat triangles. Her stomach twisted with hunger she'd been ignoring for days, but the idea of eating felt wrong somehow, like accepting this kindness would be admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. But her ribs hurt, and she was exhausted, and the soup smelled so good it made her chest ache with something that might have been longing. She sat down, picked up the spoon, took one careful sip. The warmth of it spread through her chest, easing the tightness that had nothing to do with broken bones. She took another sip, then another. Before she knew it, the bowl was empty, and she was reaching for the toast, eating like she was afraid someone might take it away. No one did. When the plate was clean, she sat back in the chair and stared at the empty dishes. It had been so long since she'd eaten without fear. Fear of eating too much, too little, too fast, too slow. Fear of her father's eyes tracking every bite and calculating whether she deserved it. Here, there had been no eyes, no judgment, just food and the freedom to want it. Serena stood and moved to the closet Victor had indicated. Inside was a wardrobe that looked like it had been professionally styled. Casual clothes, formal wear, everything in her size or close enough. She pulled out a soft t-shirt and sleep pants, changed carefully so as not to jar her ribs, and caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The bruises stood out stark against her pale skin. Wrists, arms, the shadow of fingerprints on her throat from 2 weeks ago when she'd tried to leave the dinner table without being dismissed. She looked like a map of violence, each mark telling a story she'd been forced to keep secret. But here, in this room, with that dangerous man's promise echoing in her head, "Your father doesn't get to touch you again. Ever." Maybe the story could have a different ending. She climbed into bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud and stared at the ceiling, listening to rain drum against the windows. Somewhere in this enormous house, Dominic Valenti was conducting whatever business crime lords conducted. Somewhere in the city, her father was probably celebrating getting rid of her, toasting to solved problems and clean ledgers. And here she was, lying in a stranger's guest room, full of soup and confusion and the kind of hope that felt like it might kill her if she let it grow. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about what came next. Tried not to wonder what price she'd eventually have to pay for this safety, because there was always a price. Men like Dominic Valenti didn't give gifts without expecting something in return. The question was what he wanted, and whether she'd survive the asking. Sleep came eventually, dragging her down into dreams where hands reached for her and she couldn't run, couldn't scream, could only wait for the impact that always came. She woke to darkness and silence, her heart hammering, ribs screaming from the sharp breath she'd taken. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The room was too big, the bed too soft, everything wrong and unfamiliar. Then memory returned. The estate. Dominic. Safety that felt like a lie she was choosing to believe. Serena lay in the darkness and listened to her own breathing slow. No footsteps in the hallway, no door opening. No voice telling her she was disappointing, disgusting, worthless. Just silence, and the rain, and the impossible feeling that maybe, just maybe, she might actually be safe. Morning came with sunlight that felt like an accusation. Serena woke to brightness streaming through windows she'd forgotten to close, her body stiff and aching in ways that had nothing to do with her ribs. She lay still for a moment, cataloging the pain, familiar habit, learned young. Wrists sore but not broken. Ribs tender but breathing easier than yesterday. Throat tight, but that was just anxiety, the kind that came from waking up in a stranger's house and not knowing what rules applied. A soft knock at the door made her flinch. "Miss Caldwell? It's Maria. I brought breakfast." Serena sat up carefully, pulling the sheets around herself like armor. "Come in." Maria entered with another tray, this one laden with coffee, eggs, fruit that looked too perfect to be real. She set it on the table near the window and pulled back the curtains fully, flooding the room with light that made Serena's eyes water. "Mister, Valenti asked me to let you know he's in meetings most of the day, but you're welcome to explore the grounds. Library's on the first floor, east wing. Gardens are accessible through the solarium." Maria paused, studying Serena with that same kind expression that felt dangerous in its softness. "You sleep okay?" "Yes," Serena lied. Maria's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Like she recognized the lie and was choosing not to challenge it. "Well, you need anything, you know where to find me. Victor's around too, and the security team knows to help if you ask." She left before Serena could figure out what to say to that. Security team. As if she might need protecting from something other than the people who were supposed to protect her. The coffee was perfect. The eggs were perfect. Everything about this situation was so aggressively perfect that Serena wanted to throw something just to prove that perfection was breakable. Instead, she ate. Then she showered. A bathroom the size of her old bedroom, water pressure that felt like luxury, soap that smelled like lavender and money. She dressed in jeans and a soft sweater from the closet, both fitting well enough that someone had clearly studied her measurements. The thought should have been creepy. Somehow it just felt efficient. The hallways were quieter in daylight. Serena made her way downstairs, following Maria's directions to the library and trying not to feel like an intruder in a museum. The estate was beautiful in that aggressive way wealth could be. Everything placed just so, nothing out of alignment. The kind of order that came from having staff whose entire job was maintaining perfection. The library stopped her in her tracks. 2 stories of books, floor-to-ceiling shelves connected by a wrought iron spiral staircase, leather furniture positioned near windows that overlooked the gardens. It was the kind of room her father would have called wasteful, all that space for something as useless as reading. She moved along the shelves, running her fingers over spines. Classic literature, philosophy, history, an entire section on art, another on architecture, and in the corner, tucked away like a secret, shelves devoted to crime, true crime, legal thrillers, books about organized crime that were probably more accurate than anyone outside this world would believe. The Genovese section. Serena spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. Dominic stood in the doorway, wearing dark slacks and a black t-shirt that somehow looked as formal as yesterday's dress shirt. He held a coffee cup, and there was a tiredness around his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept much either. "I didn't hear you," she said. "That's the point." He moved into the room, gesturing to the crime section. My grandfather started that collection. He believed in knowing your history, understanding where you came from. Even the ugly parts. Especially those. Your grandfather was Antonio Valenti, ran the Miami operation from 1965 until he died in '98. He was a hard man, but he had rules, lines he wouldn't cross. Dominic's expression went distant. The world's changed since then. Lines got blurred. People forgot why the rules existed in the first place. Serena didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if she was supposed to sympathize with a crime lord's nostalgia for better days of organized crime. "You look better," Dominic said, his attention shifting back to her. "Still moving careful, but better. Everything is very nice. Thank you." "It's a room, Serena. You don't have to thank me for basic decency." "In my experience, basic decency usually comes with conditions." Something sharp flashed across his face. "What kind of conditions?" She regretted the words immediately. "This was how you got in trouble. Speaking without thinking, letting your guard down, forgetting that honesty was just another word for vulnerability." "Nothing. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" "Stop apologizing." His voice was firm, but not harsh. "You said something true. I want to know what you meant." Serena looked away, focusing on the books because looking at him felt too much like being seen. "My father liked to give things, gifts, opportunities, privileges, but they always came with expectations. Unspoken rules about gratitude, about owing him, about how I was supposed to behave in return." Her throat tightened. "Nothing was ever just given. Everything was a transaction. And you think that's what this is? Isn't it?" She forced herself to meet his eyes. "You paid for me, brought me here. You're feeding me, housing me, being kind in ways I don't understand. Eventually there's going to be a price. There's always a price." Dominic set his coffee cup down on the nearest table with enough force that she flinched. He noticed, and his expression shuddered. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. Serena followed him out of the library, through hallways that twisted and turned, down a staircase she hadn't known existed, into a part of the house that felt different, older. The walls here were exposed brick, the lighting dimmer, the air cooler. They stopped at a heavy wooden door that looked like it belonged in a castle. Dominic pulled out a key, unlocked it, and gestured for her to enter first. The room beyond was an office, but different from the one upstairs. This one was all function: computer monitors, filing cabinets, a wall covered in photographs and documents connected by red string like something from a detective show. A conspiracy theorist's dream, or possibly nightmare. "This is where I work," Dominic said, closing the door behind them. "The office upstairs is for show, for meetings with people who need to believe I'm civilized. This is where the real business happens." Serena stared at the wall of photographs. Some were surveillance shots, grainy and distant. Others were professional portraits, men in expensive suits, women dripping with jewelry, all of them smiling for cameras that caught them mid-lie. "You see that man?" Dominic pointed to a photo in the center of the wall. Distinguished, silver-haired, the kind of face you'd trust with your investments or your secrets. "Marcus Pemberton runs a hedge fund that manages about $3 billion in assets. Also launders money for 2 different cartels and a human trafficking ring operating out of Port Everglades." He moved to another photo. A woman this time, beautiful in that polished way that came from good genes and better surgeons. Catherine Torres owns a chain of boutique hotels across Florida, uses them to move drugs and facilitate meetings between people who can't afford to be seen together in public. Another photo. A younger man, barely 30, with the kind of smile that belonged on a yacht club brochure. David Chen, tech entrepreneur, worth about $50 million on paper, actually makes his money selling surveillance technology to authoritarian governments and criminal organizations. No questions asked, no ethics required. Dominic turned to face her fully. "You know what all these people have in common?" Serena shook her head. "They're respectable, legitimate, the kind of people who get invited to charity galas and political fundraisers. The kind of people who shake hands with mayors and take photos with their families for society magazines." His voice hardened. "They're also the worst kind of criminals because they hide behind respectability. They use money and influence to insulate themselves from consequences while destroying lives for profit. He walked to the filing cabinets, pulled open a drawer, and extracted a folder that he handed to Serena. "Your father's file." Her hands shook as she took it. The weight of it felt wrong, too heavy for just paper. "Open it," Dominic said quietly. She did. The first page was a financial summary that made her eyes blur. Numbers that were too large to process, accounts in countries she'd never heard of, transactions dated back years, decades even. "Richard Caldwell runs what's called a charitable trust," Dominic explained. "On paper, it funds youth programs, scholarships, community development. He gets tax breaks, positive press, the kind of reputation that gets him access to influential people." He paused. "In reality, about 80% of that money never reaches the programs it's supposed to fund. It gets diverted through shell companies, laundered, and invested in operations that range from illegal gambling to drug distribution." Serena stared at the numbers, at her father's signature on document after document, each one a lie dressed up as philanthropy. Turn the page? She did, and immediately wished she hadn't. Photographs. Young faces, mostly girls, some of them barely teenagers. Missing person reports. Police files marked closed without resolution. And connections. Thin red lines connecting some of these faces to her father's businesses, his properties, his associates. "He doesn't just move money," Dominic said, his voice low and controlled in a way that suggested he was working very hard to stay calm. "He provides facilities. Locations where very bad things happen to very vulnerable people. He doesn't participate directly. He's too smart for that. But he enables it, profits from it. And then he goes home to his mansion and sleeps just fine because he's never the one getting his hands dirty." Serena couldn't breathe. The room felt too small, the air too thin. She'd known her father was cruel, had lived with his violence her entire life. But this was something else entirely. This was systematic, calculated evil. "Why are you showing me this?" The words came out strangled. "Because you asked about the price. You wanted to know what I expect from you in return for bringing you here." Dominic moved closer, his expression intense but not threatening. "I expect nothing, Serena, but I'm offering you something, information, truth. The ability to see your father for what he actually is, not what he's trained you to believe." "I already know what he is. He's a monster who's been operating freely for 30 years because he's good at hiding what he does," Dominic interrupted. "He's protected by money, by influence, by a network of people who benefit from keeping his secrets. And he's untouchable because nobody who knows the truth has the resources or the platform to expose him." Serena looked up from the file, understanding beginning to crystallize. "But you do." "I do, and so do you. I'm nobody. I have no credibility. No, you're his daughter. You're the perfect victim who survived. You're someone people will listen to." Dominic's voice softened slightly. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you that if you want to fight back, if you want to make sure he never hurts anyone else the way he hurt you, I can help. But that choice is yours. No pressure, no conditions. You can stay here, safe and protected, for as long as you want. Or you can choose to burn his entire empire to the ground." The file trembled in her hands. All those faces, all those missing girls who probably weren't missing so much as deliberately disappeared, and her father's money, carefully counted and invested, growing fat on their suffering. "He has insurance on me," Serena said suddenly, the memory surfacing. "I overheard him talking to someone last month. A $10 million policy. He joked about it being his retirement plan." Dominic went very still. "Say that again." "Life insurance. On me. He told whoever he was talking to that he'd taken out a policy months ago, that it was—" Her voice broke. "He said it was the smartest investment he'd ever made because I was bound to have an accident sooner or later." The silence that followed was absolute. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went cold and distant, like he was calculating equations that ended in violence. "He sold you to me expecting you to die," he said finally. "Got paid to clear his debt and gets $10 million when the policy pays out. Probably more if there's a double indemnity clause." "I don't understand why you're not—" Serena stopped, unable to articulate what she meant. "Why aren't you using me the way he expected? Why aren't you following through on his plan? Because I'm not him, Dominic said simply, and because the best revenge isn't giving him what he wants. It's making sure he loses everything. He took the file from her hands gently and set it on the desk. Then he did something completely unexpected. He pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. I need to tell you something about my family, about how I ended up here, running this operation, making decisions that most people would call immoral. Serena sat. She didn't know what else to do. Dominic leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his expression distant like he was looking at something far away. My grandfather built this empire on rules. Honor among thieves, he called it. You didn't hurt civilians. You didn't involve children. You didn't deal in human misery beyond what people chose for themselves. Gambling, protection, smuggling, those were acceptable because they involved consenting adults making informed choices. He paused. My father didn't believe in those rules. He thought they were sentimental, old-fashioned, bad for business. What happened? He tried to partner with people like your father, expand into more lucrative operations. When my grandfather found out, they had a disagreement that ended with my father dead and my grandfather raising me instead. Dominic's jaw tightened. I was 12, old enough to understand what had happened, old enough to know my grandfather had killed my father to protect a code most people would laugh at. I'm sorry. Don't be. My father was weak, greedy. He would have destroyed everything my grandfather built. Dominic met her eyes. I learned two things from that. First, that codes matter. Lines matter. The minute you start compromising on the things that define you, you become something you don't recognize. Second, that the most dangerous people aren't the ones who admit they're criminals. It's the ones who commit worse crimes while pretending to be respectable. He pushed off from the desk, pacing now. I've spent 15 years running this operation by my grandfather's rules. I don't traffic in people. I don't move drugs into communities that can't handle them. I don't profit from misery that wasn't chosen. That doesn't make me a good person. I'm still a criminal, still complicit in systems that hurt people, but it means I have a line I won't cross. And my father crossed it. Your father bulldozed right through it and then set up a charity to commemorate the destruction, Dominic said, his voice sharp. He came to me 6 months ago looking to launder money through my operations. When I refused, he tried to blackmail me, threatened to expose certain business dealings unless I cooperated. So you took his debt as leverage. I took his debt as an opportunity to get close enough to destroy him properly. And then when he offered you as payment, I realized I could do something better than just taking him down. Dominic stopped pacing, facing her fully. I could save someone, give you the choice he tried to steal, let you decide if you wanted justice or just peace. Serena's throat was tight. What if I just want to forget? What if I want to stay here and never think about him again? Then you stay. The room's yours, the protection's real, and you never have to make another decision you don't want to make. He said it like he meant it, like it was really that simple. But you think I should fight? I think you should choose whatever lets you sleep at night. If that's fighting, I'll give you every resource I have. If it's walking away, I'll make sure you're safe while you do it. His expression softened, just slightly. But I also think you're stronger than he ever let you believe, and that scares him more than anything I could do to him. The words settled into her chest, heavy and strange. Strong. When was the last time anyone had called her that? When had she ever been allowed to be anything other than broken, obedient, small? I need time, she said. You've got it. All the time you need. A phone rang, one of the monitors on the wall lighting up with an incoming call. Dominic glanced at it, and his expression shifted to something harder, more businesslike. I have to take this. You okay getting back upstairs on your own? Yes. Victor's probably in the kitchen if you need anything. And Serena? He waited until she met his eyes. That file stays between us for now. You want to read more? Want to understand what he's done? You come to me. But you don't carry this alone. Understand? She nodded, not trusting her voice. He answered the phone in Italian, his tone shifting to something clipped and authoritative. Serena slipped out of the office and made her way back upstairs, her mind churning. The library felt different now. Quieter. Or maybe she was just hearing the silence differently, understanding that even in a house full of books and beauty, The real truth lived in basement offices with walls covered in evidence of evil wearing expensive suits. She spent the afternoon reading, losing herself in fiction because reality was too heavy to carry. Maria brought lunch that she barely touched. Victor checked in once, asking if she needed anything, his kind eyes suggesting he knew something significant had happened but was too professional to ask. As evening approached, Serena found herself drawn to the gardens. They were extensive, maze-like, with fountains and sculptures positioned among flowering plants that probably cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. She walked until she found a bench hidden behind a wall of jasmine, sat down, and finally let herself cry. Not the silent tears she'd learned to shed in her father's house, the kind that didn't make noise, didn't leave evidence, didn't prove weakness. This was ugly crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and damaged, the kind that acknowledged just how broken everything had been. She cried for the little girl who'd thought it was normal for fathers to hurt their daughters, for the teenager who'd learned to hide bruises and lie about accidents, for the woman who'd walked into a crime lord's house expecting to die, and instead found something that looked uncomfortably like hope. "Miss Caldwell?" She looked up, wiping at her face with hands that wouldn't steady. One of the security guards stood a respectful distance away, young and uncomfortable with her tears. "Mr. Valenti asked me to let you know dinner's at 7 if you'd like to join him. Main dining room, first floor. But he said to tell you it's not required. You can eat in your room if you prefer." An invitation with an exit. Even now, even in something as simple as dinner, he was giving her choice. "Tell him I'll be there," she said. The guard nodded and left her to her tears. Serena sat in the fading light and tried to imagine what dinner with a crime lord looked like. What they talked about. Whether she'd have to pretend to be someone she wasn't, or if the strange honesty that seemed to exist between them would hold. At 6:45, she made her way to her room and changed into something that felt appropriate. A simple dress from the closet, dark blue and modest, the kind of thing her father would have approved of, which meant she immediately wanted to choose something else. But she didn't have the energy for rebellion tonight. She was too tired, too emotionally wrung out, too aware of how much her entire world had shifted in less than 24 hours. The dining room was smaller than she'd expected, intimate even. A table that could seat 12 but was set for 2, at one end where conversation would be easy. Candles flickered in crystal holders, and through the windows the last light of day painted the gardens in shades of gold. Dominic was already there, standing near the windows with a glass of wine in hand. He'd changed too. Dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows in that same casual confidence he seemed to wear like armor. "You came," he said, and she thought she heard relief in his voice. "You invited me. I gave you an option. There's a difference." He gestured to the table. "Sit, please." She did. He poured her wine without asking if she wanted it, then sat across from her. For a moment they just looked at each other, and Serena had the strange thought that they were both trying to figure out how to be normal when neither of them had any idea what normal looked like. "I'm not good at this," Dominic said finally. "At what?" "Having someone here who isn't staff or business, someone I'm not negotiating with or protecting from or planning against." He took a drink of his wine. "The last person who lived in this house was my grandfather. He died when I was 27. Since then, it's just been me and the people who work for me. This," he gestured between them, "is unfamiliar territory." "I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be here," Serena admitted. "I'm not staff, I'm not business. You're someone who deserves better than what you got. That's enough." Maria appeared with the first course, soup again, but different than yesterday. Something with vegetables and herbs that smelled like comfort. "Thank you, Maria," Dominic said. "Enjoy." She smiled at both of them and disappeared as quietly as she'd come. They ate in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged with things neither of them knew how to say. "The file," Serena said eventually. "Those girls. Do you know what happened to them?" Dominic's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "Some of them. Not all. That's part of what makes your father so effective. He's good at creating plausible deniability. By the time anyone connects the dots, the evidence is gone and the victims are too afraid to talk." "But you have evidence." "I have puzzle pieces. Financial records, witness statements from people too scared to testify, surveillance that shows meetings but not crimes. It's enough to know what he is. Not enough to prove it in court. What would be enough? Dominic studied her across the table. Someone with direct knowledge willing to go on record. Financial documents that directly link his legitimate businesses to criminal operations. Or, he paused, a confession. The kind that can't be denied or explained away. He'd never confess. Not willingly. But people confess when they think they're safe, when they're bragging to people they trust. When they think there's no consequence for telling the truth. He leaned back in his chair. Your father has enemies. People he's cheated, threatened, used. If someone could get close enough, stay silent long enough, they might hear things that could bury him. You mean me? I mean that's one option, not the only one, and not one I'd ask you to take unless you wanted it. His expression was serious. Understand what I'm saying, Serena. If you wanted to be the one to bring him down, I could teach you how. How to listen, how to record, how to gather evidence without him knowing, but that would mean going back into his world. Letting him think he won. Playing a role that would put you directly in danger. He already thinks I'm dead or dying. Isn't that what you said? He's waiting for the insurance payout. Which means if you showed up alive, he'd have questions. He'd want to know where you've been, what happened, why you came back. Dominic's voice went harder. And he'd likely try to finish what he started. Make sure that policy pays out before you can cause trouble. The thought should have terrified her. Should have sent her running back to her safe room with its soft bed and locked door. Instead, Serena felt something else. Something hot and sharp and hungry. Anger. Not the helpless kind she'd felt her entire life. The kind that turned inward, that made her believe she deserved the pain. This was different. This was rage with direction, purpose, the kind of anger that wanted justice instead of just survival. Teach me, she said. Dominic's eyes widened slightly. You don't have to decide tonight. Think about, I've spent 26 years thinking, planning, trying to figure out how to be good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough that he'd stop hurting me. Her voice was steady now, strengthened by certainty. It was never about me. It was always about him, his need for control, his enjoyment of causing pain. And now I find out he's been doing this to other people, that girls are missing, suffering, possibly dead because of his greed. She stood, surprising herself with the steadiness of her hands. You said I was stronger than he let me believe. You said I could choose justice. So I'm choosing. Teach me how to destroy him. Dominic stood too, moving around the table until they were face to face. He looked at her like he was trying to see past her certainty to the fear underneath. She let him look, let him see both things, the terror and the determination. This isn't a decision you make once, he said quietly. It's a decision you'll have to make every day, every time you're afraid, every time he gets close, every time you remember why you're doing this. It's going to hurt. It's going to be dangerous, and there's no guarantee it works. I know. And you still want to do it. I need to do it. For those girls. For everyone he's hurt. For... Her voice cracked. For the version of me who believed she deserved what he did. She deserves to see him pay. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition of something in her that matched something in him. Then we start tomorrow, he said. Training, education, everything you need to know about how to walk back into hell and come out with the evidence to burn it down. He held out his hand, not a demand, an offer. Serena took it and felt the deal settle between them like a covenant. She was choosing war, choosing danger, choosing to become someone her father would never expect, someone capable of fighting back. The girl who'd arrived yesterday, broken and silent, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone angry, someone who'd learned that monsters could be destroyed if you knew where to strike. And she was about to become an expert in exactly that. Training started at 6 a.m. with Dominic knocking on her door like he was trying to break it down. Serena had been awake for an hour already, lying in bed and wondering if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. The certainty from last night felt thinner in daylight, more like bravado than actual courage. You coming, or do I drag you out? Dominic's voice carried through the door, amused but serious. She opened it to find him in workout clothes, looking far too alert for someone who probably slept as little as she did. What kind of training starts at 6? The kind that keeps you alive. Come on, gym's downstairs. The gym turned out to be a full facility: weights, cardio equipment, mats for sparring, mirrors lining one wall. It smelled like sweat and rubber, and the kind of discipline Serena had never associated with physical activity. Her father had preferred she stay weak, easier to control. "First lesson," Dominic said, tossing her a water bottle. "Your body isn't your enemy. It's been treated like one, trained to flinch and freeze, but that stops now. You're going to learn what it feels like to be strong." "I thought you were teaching me to gather evidence, not fight." "I'm teaching you to survive. Evidence doesn't matter if you're dead." He moved to the mats. "Your father's going to test you when you go back. He'll want to see if you're still broken. If you still flinch when he raises his hand, you need to be able to control those responses or he'll know something changed." The logic made sense, even if the idea of controlling her fear felt impossible. They started with breathing. Simple exercises that felt stupid until Dominic explained how panic worked, how the body's response to threat could be managed if you knew what to watch for. Then they moved to stance, balance, awareness of space. Nothing aggressive yet, just learning to inhabit her own body like it belonged to her. By 7:30, Serena was sweating and exhausted, and her ribs were screaming. Dominic called a break and handed her more water. "You did good. I can barely breathe, so..." "That's the ribs healing. Give it another week. You'll feel different." He sat down beside her on the mat, close enough that she could see the scar tissue on his knuckles. "This is going to be the routine. Every morning we work on physical conditioning. Afternoons we study your father's operation, who he works with, where he does business, what his patterns are. Evenings we practice the performance." "Performance?" "Going back means playing a role. The broken daughter who escaped somehow, who's grateful to be home, who's learned her lesson about being obedient." His expression went hard. "It's going to make you sick pretending to be that person again. But it's the only way to get close enough to hear what he's really doing." Serena's stomach twisted. "How long would I have to do it?" "Depends on how fast we can get what we need. Could be weeks, could be months." He met her eyes. "And you'd be wearing a wire, recording everything, which means if he finds it, if he suspects anything, he'll kill me." "He'll try, which is why you need to be able to fight back if it comes to that." Dominic stood, offering her a hand up. "This isn't a game, Serena. Once you commit, there's no halfway. You're either all in or you walk away now." She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her whole body ached, but it was a different kind of pain than what she was used to. This hurt because she'd pushed herself, because she'd worked muscles that had been dormant. It was pain with purpose. "I'm all in." The days that followed blurred together in a routine that was somehow both exhausting and stabilizing. Mornings in the gym, learning to move, learning to control her fear responses. Afternoons in the basement office, studying files that made her stomach turn, documentation of her father's empire, the careful architecture of his crimes. Evenings in the dining room with Dominic, eating meals that felt surreal in their normalcy while they discussed things like wire placement and how to trigger confessions. A week in, Victor pulled her aside after breakfast. "Mister, Valenti asked me to take you shopping today." Serena blinked. "Shopping?" "You'll need clothes for when you go back. Things that look like your father would approve. Conservative, expensive. The kind of wardrobe that says you've learned your place." Victor's expression was carefully neutral, but she caught the distaste in his tone. "It's costume work, playing a part." They spent 4 hours in boutiques that catered to Miami's elite, Victor sitting patiently while she tried on dresses that made her look like someone's well-behaved daughter. It felt wrong, putting on these clothes, but she understood the strategy. Her father's world had specific aesthetics. Blending in meant disappearing into them. "This one," Victor said when she emerged in a pale pink dress that she would have hated 2 weeks ago. "You look exactly like what he'd want you to look like." That was the point, she supposed. Become invisible through compliance. Let him think he'd won. They returned to the estate with enough clothing to fill her closet twice over. Dominic was waiting in the library, surrounded by papers that he swept aside when she entered. "How'd it go?" "I look like a Stepford wife threw up on me," Serena said. He laughed, an actual laugh that transformed his whole face. "Good. That's exactly what we need. He sees you looking like that. He'll think you've been properly traumatized into submission." "I have been traumatized into submission." I've spent my whole life. She stopped, the old defensiveness rising. Had, Dominic corrected gently. You had spent your whole life that way. Now you're choosing to look like it while being something completely different underneath. He stood, moving to where she stood near the doorway. There's power in that, in knowing you're playing a role instead of living it. Does it feel like power? Because right now it just feels like lying. Strategic deception, there's a difference. Over dinner that night, Dominic outlined the timeline. 3 more weeks of training, then they'd stage her return. He'd already started planting rumors in certain circles that Richard Caldwell's daughter had run away after a mental breakdown, that she was probably dead in a ditch somewhere. When she showed up alive, there would be shock, but also a narrative already in place. Troubled girl, unstable, prone to dramatics. He'll believe it because it's what he wants to believe, Dominic explained. That you're weak, that you failed at even running away properly, that you came crawling back because you have nowhere else to go. What if he just kills me immediately? He won't. Not right away. He'll want to punish you first, make sure you understand the consequences of defiance. That's when you'll be most useful, when he's angry and feeling powerful, when he wants to brag about how he's going to teach you a lesson. Dominic's expression was cold. Men like your father, they love an audience for their cruelty, even if that audience is just the person they're hurting. Serena pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. You sound like you've done this before. Not exactly this, but I've run operations that required people to go undercover, to pretend to be things they weren't. It's always dangerous, always a risk. He set down his fork. The difference is those people were trained operatives who chose this life. You're someone with no training who's choosing it anyway. Someone who deserves a different choice, a safer one. There is no safe choice when it comes to my father, Serena said. Either I hide forever or I fight back. And hiding means he keeps destroying people. So really, there's only one choice. Something shifted in the way Dominic looked at her, like he was seeing past the scared girl to whoever she was becoming. You're going to need a handler, he said. Someone outside the house who can monitor the recordings, who you can signal if things go wrong. I'm too recognizable. If your father sees me anywhere near you or his operation, he'll know something's up. So who? I have someone in mind. You'll meet her tomorrow. The woman who showed up the next afternoon looked nothing like what Serena expected. Mid-40s, dressed like she'd just come from a yoga class, with kind eyes and smile lines that suggested she laughed often. Her name was Claire, and she was, according to Dominic's introduction, one of the best surveillance technicians on the East Coast. Former FBI, Claire said, shaking Serena's hand. Got tired of the bureaucracy and went private. Now I help people who actually want to catch criminals instead of just filing paperwork about them. They spent 3 hours in the basement office, Claire explaining the equipment Serena would wear, a device so small it looked like a button, positioned on clothing where it would pick up conversation without being obvious. There was a panic signal too, a specific pattern she could tap that would alert Claire something was wrong. The recordings go to a secure server I control, Claire explained. Even if your father finds the wire, he won't be able to trace where the data went. But Serena, I need you to understand something. Her expression went serious. Once you start recording, everything you hear becomes evidence. That includes things he might say about you to you, descriptions of what he's done or plans to do. It's going to be brutal to listen to your own abuse in those terms. Are you prepared for that? Was she? Serena didn't know. But she nodded anyway because the alternative was letting him continue unchallenged. Good. Then let's practice. They ran scenarios for hours, Claire playing her father, saying things designed to trigger Serena's fear responses, while Serena practiced staying calm, asking questions that would make him elaborate, steering conversation toward admissions. It was harder than physical training, harder than studying files. This required her to engage with the version of her father that lived in her head, the one who knew exactly which words would cut deepest. By the time Claire left, Serena felt hollowed out. Dominic found her in the library afterward, staring at nothing. That was rough, he said, sitting down beside her. She sounded exactly like him. How did she... I gave her recordings. Speeches he's made, interviews, phone calls we've intercepted. She studied his patterns. Dominic's voice was gentle. I know that was hard, but better to practice with Claire than be surprised when he says something that destroys you in the moment. Does it get easier, the practicing? No, but you get stronger, better at separating the performance from the reality. He was quiet for a moment. You don't have to do this, Serena. I keep saying that because I need you to know it's true. There are other ways to hurt him, other approaches that don't require you to face him, to hear him. She turned to look at Dominic. I've been running from his voice in my head my entire life. Maybe it's time I stopped running and started using it against him. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Physical training intensified, Dominic pushing her harder now that her ribs had healed enough to handle impact. He taught her how to take a hit, how to protect vital areas, how to fight back if fighting became necessary. The first time she actually landed a punch on him, he'd insisted she try, had goaded her into it. She burst into tears from the shock of her own violence. Good, he'd said, helping her up from where she'd collapsed. That's the hardness you need, the willingness to hurt back. The surveillance training got more complex too. Claire came twice a week, running scenarios that got progressively darker, forcing Serena to practice keeping her composure while hearing terrible things. They worked on her cover story too, where she'd been the past month, what had happened, crafting lies that were believable enough to pass initial scrutiny. I was in a motel in Orlando, Serena practiced one afternoon. I took the bus, paid cash. I thought I could just disappear, but I ran out of money, and I realized I had nowhere else to go. Good, Claire said. Ashamed, defeated, but not broken enough to be useless. He'll want you functional enough to punish properly. What if he asks why you came back? Because I'm sorry. Because I understand now that I was wrong to leave, The words stuck in her throat. Keep going. You need to be able to say it without hesitating. That I need him. That I can't survive without him. Bile rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. That I'll do better, be better, whatever he wants. Claire's expression was sympathetic but firm. Again, until you can say it like you mean it. They practiced until Serena could deliver the lines without her voice shaking, until she could make herself small and apologetic, until she could embody the broken daughter her father expected to see. In the evenings, she and Dominic talked, about strategy mostly, but also about other things. He told her about his grandfather's code, about growing up in a world where violence was normal but had rules. She told him about her mother, dead since Serena was 8, a gentle woman who'd tried to protect her daughter but hadn't been strong enough to leave. She used to tell me it would get better when I was older, Serena said one night over wine that had become part of their routine. That I just needed to be patient, that my father loved me even if he had a hard time showing it. She laughed, bitter. What a lie that was. She probably believed it. People believe what they need to believe to survive. Like I believed I deserved it? You were a child. Children believe what they're taught. Dominic refilled her glass. The fact that you're questioning it now, fighting back, that takes more strength than most people ever find. You keep saying that I'm strong, but I don't feel strong. I feel terrified every time I think about actually going back there. Fear and strength aren't opposites. Being strong means doing the thing that terrifies you anyway. He met her eyes. You're one of the bravest people I've ever met. The words hit her somewhere deep. She looked away, uncomfortable with being seen that way. Tell me about the gala, she said, changing the subject to something they'd been circling around for days. Dominic had mentioned it once, a charity event her father hosted every year, one of Miami's biggest social occasions. This year it was scheduled for 3 weeks after Serena's planned return. It's his crowning achievement, Dominic explained. 500 guests, media coverage, politicians, and business leaders all gathered to celebrate Richard Caldwell's philanthropic contributions. He gives a speech about helping the community, cuts a check for some youth program, and everyone applauds what a wonderful man he is. While behind the scenes, he's destroying those same communities. Exactly. It's the perfect platform for exposure. All those people, all that media. If we had concrete evidence of what he really is, evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away, the gala becomes a stage for his destruction instead of his celebration. Serena felt something cold and clear settle in her chest. You want me to record him bragging, get him to admit what he's done, what he's planning, and then we release it at the gala. I want you to survive first, the recordings second. But yes, ideally, if we can get enough evidence in the weeks before the gala, we can time the exposure for maximum impact. Dominic's expression was serious. Imagine him standing on that stage in front of everyone who thinks he's a saint, and having the truth of what he has broadcast across every screen in the room. No hiding, no damage control, just raw truth in front of witnesses who can't be silenced. He'd be destroyed. Completely. Criminally, socially, financially, every piece of the life he built would collapse. Dominic paused. But that only works if you can get the recordings, if you can survive being in that house long enough to hear him confess. How long do you think it would take? Hard to say. Could be days if he's feeling cocky. Could be weeks if he's cautious. But the gala gives us a deadline. 3 weeks from when you return. That's our window. 3 weeks of living in her father's house, playing the obedient daughter, waiting for moments when his guard was down enough to reveal the monster underneath. 3 weeks of fear and performance, and recording her own abuse for evidence. I can do 3 weeks, Serena said. Are you sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. The final week before her return, the training shifted to something more psychological. Dominic brought in a man named Marcus, different from her father's driver. This one was a psychologist who specialized in trauma and manipulation. Your father spent your whole life conditioning you to respond certain ways, Marcus explained. Flinching when he's angry, apologizing when he's cruel, believing you caused his reactions. Those are trauma responses, and they're deeply embedded. We need to acknowledge they'll still happen while teaching you to function through them. They worked on grounding techniques, ways to stay present even when fear threatened to overwhelm her. They practiced recognizing manipulation tactics so she could see them coming instead of just reacting. It was exhausting work, peeling back layers of conditioning to find the person underneath. You'll probably still flinch, Marcus told her on their last session. You'll probably still feel that gut-level fear when he raises his voice. But now you'll know that's your body remembering past danger, not responding to present reality. You can acknowledge the fear and keep moving anyway. And if I can't, if I freeze or panic, then you signal Claire and we extract you. This isn't a suicide mission, Serena. We're not asking you to martyr yourself. You go in, you gather what you can, and the second it becomes too dangerous, you get out. But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Once she was in her father's house, every exit would be controlled by him. Leaving wouldn't be a matter of just walking out. The night before her return, Serena couldn't sleep. She paced her room, trying on the clothes she'd wear tomorrow, a dove gray dress that made her look fragile and repentant, exactly what her father would want. The wire was hidden in the seam, invisible, unless you knew to look for it. Claire had tested it a dozen times. It would work. Probably. A knock at her door, soft enough that she almost missed it. Come in. Dominic entered, looking as tired as she felt. Thought you might be awake. Can't seem to stop thinking. That's normal. Last night before a dangerous operation, your mind goes into overdrive trying to prepare for every possible scenario. Is that what this is? An operation? It's what I'm calling it because the alternatives sound worse. He sat on the edge of her bed, a casual intimacy that had developed over weeks of training together. You can still back out. How many times are you going to give me that option? Until I'm convinced you're choosing this freely, and not because you think you owe me something. Serena sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I don't owe you, I know that. You've made it very clear this is my choice, but that's exactly why I'm doing it. Because for the first time in my life, I get to choose. Not just what I do, but who I am. And I choose to be someone who fights back. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a saint's medal on a thin chain. My grandfather gave this to me the night before I took over the family business. Said it was for protection, though I think he knew faith wasn't really my thing. But I've carried it through every dangerous situation since then, and I'm still here. He held it out to her. I want you to have it. I can't. You can. And you will. Because walking back into that house tomorrow is the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do. And you deserve every piece of protection available, real or symbolic. She took the medal warm from his pocket. It felt substantial in her palm, weighty with meaning she couldn't quite name. Thank you. Well, don't thank me until you come back safe. He stood, moving toward the door, then paused. Serena, when this is over, when your father is destroyed and you're free, what do you want to do? Where do you want to be? The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on survival, on revenge, that she hadn't thought about what came after. I don't know, she admitted. I've never had the luxury of thinking that far ahead. Think about it. While you're in there, pretending to be someone you're not, remember that there's an after. A life where you get to choose everything, where you live, what you do, who you become. That's what you're fighting for. Not just justice, freedom. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Serena lay awake until dawn, turning the metal over in her fingers, trying to imagine a future where she wasn't defined by her father's violence. It felt impossible, like trying to picture colors that didn't exist, but maybe that was the point. Maybe freedom was supposed to feel impossible until you fought for it. Morning came too fast. Maria brought breakfast, but Serena couldn't eat. Victor arrived at 9 with final equipment checks. The wire tested and working, the panic signal confirmed with Claire, a phone that looked normal but had a direct line to Dominic hidden in emergency contacts. At 10, she dressed in the gray dress and studied herself in the mirror. She looked exactly like who she was supposed to be. Richard Caldwell's properly chastened daughter, grateful to be allowed home, desperate to make amends. The performance of a lifetime, and the audience was a monster. Dominic met her at the front door. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, definitely, but also something else. Pride, maybe, or possibly fear. Remember the rules, he said. Get the recordings if you can, but prioritize staying alive. Signal Claire if anything feels wrong. And Serena, he paused. You're not the same person who walked in here a month ago. Don't let him convince you otherwise. I won't. And if you need out, anytime, any reason, you call me. I don't care if it's 3 a.m. or if we haven't gotten everything we need. Your safety matters more than the evidence. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The car waiting outside was nondescript, driven by one of Dominic's people. They'd drop her 3 blocks from her father's estate, let her walk the rest. The story was she'd been surviving on the streets, too ashamed to come home, finally breaking down and deciding to beg for forgiveness. The drive felt too short. Miami passed by in sunlight and palm trees, beautiful and indifferent to the terror churning in her gut. She clutched the saint's medal in her pocket, the metal grounding her. They stopped at the predetermined corner. The driver met her eyes in the rearview mirror. You got this. She didn't, but she opened the door anyway. The walk to her father's estate was 3 blocks that felt like 3 miles. With every step, the conditioning kicked in stronger. The fear, the automatic apologies her mind was already forming, the way her body wanted to make itself smaller. But underneath it, there was something new. Anger. Purpose. The wire pressed against her ribs like a promise. The gates were closed, but she knew the code. Her hand shook as she punched it in, and for a horrible second she thought he'd changed it, locked her out even symbolically. Then the gate swung open, and she was walking up the drive to the house where she'd learned that love and violence were the same thing. The front door opened before she reached it. Marcus stood there, her father's Marcus, looking at her like he'd seen a ghost. Miss Caldwell, he said, his voice carefully neutral. Your father wasn't expecting you. I know. Is he home? I need to speak with him. Marcus studied her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. Whatever he reported to her father would shape how this went. He's in his office. I'll let him know you're here. He stepped aside and Serena walked into the house that had been her prison. Nothing had changed. Same furniture, same art, same smell of expensive cologne and older money. But she had changed, and that made everything different. She waited in the foyer while Marcus disappeared upstairs. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might trigger the wire. The metal felt heavy in her pocket. Somewhere miles away, Claire was listening through the receiver, and Dominic was probably pacing his office, waiting for confirmation she'd made it inside. She'd made it inside. Now she just had to survive what came next. Footsteps on the stairs. Her father descended like a king granting an audience, his expression unreadable. He looked older than she remembered, or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as the giant who controlled her world, but as a man. Cruel, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But human. Mortal. Destroyable. Serena, he said, her name sounding like a curse. I thought you were dead. She dropped her gaze, playing the role. I'm sorry, Father. I'm so sorry. Can we talk, please? He studied her for a long moment, and she knew he was calculating, deciding if she was useful alive or if the insurance payout was still the better investment. My office, he said finally. We have a lot to discuss. She followed him upstairs, every step feeling like walking toward her own execution. But the wire was recording, Claire was listening, and Dominic had promised he'd come for her if she signaled. The performance had begun, and somewhere behind her fear, Serena felt something that might have been power. Her father was about to tell her everything, thinking she was still the broken girl who believed his lies. He had no idea she'd become the weapon that would destroy him. Her father's office looked exactly as it had the last time she'd been summoned here. The night before, he'd handed her over to Dominic. Same mahogany desk, same leather chair positioned to catch the light, same photographs on the walls showing him shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. A gallery of lies, each smile hiding the rot underneath. He sat behind the desk and gestured to the chair across from him, the same chair where she'd sat a month ago, bruised and silent, waiting to learn her fate. Sit. Serena sat, keeping her eyes down, her shoulders rounded. Every instinct screamed to run, but she forced herself to stay still, the wire pressed against her skin, recording every word, every breath. Where have you been? His voice was cold, clinical, like he was conducting an inventory check rather than speaking to his daughter who'd been missing for a month. Orlando, she said softly. I took a bus. I thought I could start over somewhere else. And how did that work out for you? It didn't. I ran out of money. I didn't know anyone. I slept in a motel until I couldn't afford it anymore. Then She let her voice crack, playing the shame. I didn't know where else to go. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that saw inventory, not humanity. You cost me a significant amount of money, Serena. The debt I settled by giving you to Valenti, that still exists. And now here you are, alive and worthless, expecting me to just take you back? The words should have hurt. A month ago, they would have destroyed her. Now they just felt like confirmation of what she'd always known. To him, she was never a daughter, just an asset that had failed to appreciate in value. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know I disappointed you. I know I was ungrateful. But please, I'll do anything. I'll be better. You'll what? He leaned forward, and there was something predatory in his expression. You'll magically become useful? You'll stop being the pathetic, weak creature I've had to tolerate for 26 years? I'll try. I promise I'll try. He stood, moving around the desk, and Serena's body went rigid with remembered fear. This was the position he favored, standing over her, making her crane her neck to look up, reminding her physically of the power imbalance. What happened with Valenti? The question came sharp and sudden. How did you get away from him? This was the test. The story had to be perfect, or he'd know something was wrong. He didn't want me. The words came out small, ashamed. When Marcus dropped me off, Valenti took one look at me and said I wasn't worth the debt you owed, she swallowed hard, that I was damaged goods. He had his people drive me to a bus station and told me to disappear. It was the story Dominic had crafted, built on her father's own beliefs about her worthlessness. The kind of rejection Richard would find believable because it matched his view of his daughter's value. Something shifted in her father's expression. Not sympathy, he wasn't capable of that, but satisfaction, like having Serena rejected by a man he feared validated all his cruelty. Of course he didn't want you. Why would he? You're nothing but a liability dressed up in expensive clothes. He circled back to his desk, and Serena felt the pressure ease slightly. But now you're here, and you're my problem again. What am I supposed to do with you? Let me stay. Please, I'll earn my place. I'll help with the foundation, with the charity work, whatever you need. The foundation. He laughed, and it was the cruelest sound she'd ever heard. You think I need help with that circus? It runs itself, Serena. All I do is show up, smile for cameras, and sign checks that make me look like a saint while the real money goes where it's supposed to go. Her heart jumped. This was it. An opening. She needed him to elaborate, to say more, but pushing too hard would raise suspicion. I don't understand. Of course you don't. You've never understood anything. He pulled open a drawer, extracted a bottle of scotch and a glass. It wasn't even noon. The foundation exists for one purpose: to make Richard Caldwell look like a philanthropist while providing cover for business that's significantly more profitable than pretending to care about underprivileged children. He poured himself 3 fingers, didn't offer her any. Serena watched him drink and tried to keep her breathing steady. He was confessing, casually, like it didn't matter if she heard, because to him, she was no threat, just his broken daughter too scared to do anything with the truth. "You'll stay," he said finally. "But there are conditions. You'll attend the gala with me next week. Smile pretty, play the grateful daughter, help me maintain the image of family man. You'll be visible enough that people see I'm generous enough to forgive your little breakdown, but you won't speak unless spoken to, understood?" "Yes, Father. And if you ever try to run again, if you ever embarrass me like this again—" He set the glass down with enough force that liquid sloshed over the rim. "The insurance policy I have on you doesn't care if the death is accidental or deliberate. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Ice flooded her veins. He was threatening to kill her openly, while the wire recorded every word. "I understand." "Good. Marcus will show you to your old room. It hasn't been touched. I saw no point in redecorating for someone I expected to be dead." He waved her away like she was a servant being dismissed. "We'll discuss your responsibilities later. Right now I have actual work to do." Serena stood on shaking legs and moved toward the door. "Oh, and Serena?" His voice stopped her at the threshold. "Welcome home." The words were acid. She left without responding, found Marcus waiting in the hallway like he'd been listening. His expression was carefully blank, but she thought she saw something flicker there. Pity, maybe. Or possibly just discomfort. "This way, miss." Her old room was exactly as she'd left it. Bed made with military precision, desk clear of anything personal, closet full of clothes chosen by her father's staff. It felt like a museum display of someone else's life. The girl who'd lived here was gone, replaced by someone harder. Marcus left her alone, and Serena sat on the bed, trying to process what had just happened. Her father had confessed to fraud, admitted the foundation was a shell, and threatened her life. All in the space of 10 minutes, all recorded on equipment he didn't know existed. Her phone buzzed. The special one Dominic had given her. A text from an unknown number that she knew was Claire. "Got it all. Clear audio. You did perfect. Stay safe." Relief and terror warred in her chest. They had evidence, but now she had to survive here long enough to gather more. One confession wasn't enough. They needed details, names, specifics about where the money went and who was involved. The next week was a carefully choreographed nightmare. Serena played her role flawlessly, the obedient daughter, helping plan the gala, attending fittings for a dress her father selected, smiling when required and staying silent when not. She learned to fade into background, to be present without being noticed. And she listened. Her father was cocky, comfortable in his home territory. He took phone calls in rooms where she was present, conducted meetings in his office with the door open, spoke freely about business because he genuinely believed she was too stupid and too scared to understand or care. She heard him discuss the foundation's real accounting with his lawyer, how donations were diverted through shell companies, how events like the gala were less about raising money and more about providing opportunities to meet with people who needed discreet services. She heard him laugh about a city councilman he'd bought, a judge who had dismissed charges against one of his associates, a journalist who'd killed a story after receiving the right incentive. Every conversation was recorded, every admission documented. Claire sent brief confirmations through the phone, messages that looked like spam but carried coded reassurance that the evidence was piling up. 4 days before the gala, her father had visitors. Serena was arranging flowers in the dining room, busy work assigned to keep her useful but invisible, when they arrived. 3 men in expensive suits, the kind who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. "Richard, good to see you." The tallest one, silver-haired and distinguished, shook her father's hand. "Marcus, Catherine, David, come in, please." Her father's voice was warm, welcoming, nothing like the ice he used with Serena. She recognized the names from Dominic's wall. These were the people he'd shown her, the criminals hiding behind legitimacy, using their wealth and influence to insulate themselves from consequences. They settled in her father's study, but the door remained ajar. Serena continued her flower arrangement, moving slowly, staying quiet. invisible. Concerns about the Miami operation, one of them was saying. Marcus Pemberton, based on the voice. There's been increased federal scrutiny on cross-border transactions. We need to adjust how we're moving the funds. The foundation can handle more volume, her father replied. We just completed the audit. Came back clean as always. As far as the IRS is concerned, we're a model charitable organization. What about the Port Everglades situation? That was the woman, Catherine Torres. The last shipment had complications. We can't afford another incident like that. That's been handled. The dock supervisor who was asking questions is no longer employed, or breathing for that matter. Her father's tone was casual, like he was discussing firing a gardener rather than murder. The route is secure. Serena's hands trembled. She nearly dropped the vase she was holding. Breathing carefully, she set it down and continued working, her mind racing. He'd just admitted to murder. On tape. With witnesses who were complicit. And the gala? The third man, David Chen. Are we still moving forward with the announcements? Absolutely. It's the perfect venue. 500 guests, half of them in positions to be useful. We'll announce the foundation's expansion into youth housing, completely legitimate on the surface, but the properties we acquire can serve multiple purposes. Her father sounded pleased with himself. Catherine, your hotels have proven the model works beautifully. We just replicate it with a charitable wrapper. Youth housing, Catherine's voice was approving. That's clever. Who's going to question a philanthropist providing shelter for at-risk teenagers? Exactly. And the beauty is that the ones who go missing, nobody looks too hard. These are kids already invisible to the system. Easy to exploit, easier to discard. Serena thought she might vomit. She gripped the edge of the table, fighting for control. This was what Dominic had talked about, the worst kind of criminals, using vulnerability as opportunity. The conversation continued, laying out plans that made her skin crawl. She stayed frozen in place, arranging and rearranging flowers that didn't need arranging, while the wire recorded evidence of conspiracy, fraud, human trafficking, and murder. When the visitors finally left, her father found her still in the dining room. Those flowers look ridiculous. Have Maria redo them. Yes, father. He studied her for a moment, and Serena felt her heart stop. Had he noticed? Did he suspect? You're quiet today, even more than usual. I'm just trying to stay out of the way, like you asked. Good. That's exactly what I want from you, invisible and obedient. He checked his watch. I have another meeting. Stay in your room this evening. I'm having guests for dinner and you're not needed. Relief flooded through her. Of course. Back in her room, she locked the door and pulled out the phone. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to type the message. Major evidence today. Multiple people. Discussed murder, trafficking, fraud. Need out soon. Claire's response came fast. Dominic says 3 more days until gala. Can you hold? Could she? 3 more days in this house, playing this role, listening to her father casually discuss destroying lives like it was just business. 3 more days of smiling and staying silent while recording evidence that would bury him. Yes, I can hold. She had to. They were so close. That night, Serena lay awake and thought about the girls in those photographs Dominic had shown her. The missing ones, the invisible ones, the ones her father saw as disposable. She thought about the youth housing project he was planning, the fresh supply of vulnerable victims he'd have access to. And she thought about the gala, 500 witnesses, media coverage, the perfect stage for truth that couldn't be hidden or explained away. She clutched the saint's medal Dominic had given her and made a promise to those invisible girls. 3 more days and their stories would be heard. 3 more days and the man who'd hurt them would face consequences. The morning of the gala, her father was in excellent spirits. He'd already been interviewed by 2 different news outlets, both running stories about his philanthropic vision and commitment to Miami's youth. The irony was nauseating. You'll wear the blue dress, he told Serena over breakfast. And you'll stay by my side during the reception. I want everyone to see what a united family looks like. Yes, father. The speech is at 8. After that, we'll mingle. You'll be charming, grateful, everything a daughter should be. Can you manage that? I think so. You think so? His voice went cold. That's not good enough, Serena. Tonight is important. I've worked for 30 years building this reputation, and I won't have you ruin it with your usual incompetence. I won't ruin it, I promise. You'd better not. He stood, dropping his napkin on the table. The car leaves at 6. Be ready. The hours until 6 felt both endless and far too short. Serena dressed in the blue gown, sapphire silk that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She looked exactly how her father wanted, elegant, refined, the perfect accessory to his perfect image. The wire was sewn into the dress's interior seam, invisible against the fabric. Claire had confirmed it was working during a brief bathroom break where Serena could whisper without being heard. Dominic's already at the venue, Claire had said through the earpiece. Different section, different identity, but he's there. You signal anything wrong, he'll get to you in under a minute. Knowing he was close helped. Knowing he'd come for her if needed made the performance possible. The ballroom was spectacular. Crystal chandeliers, tables draped in white and gold, flowers everywhere. Miami's elite mingled in designer clothing, drinking champagne that cost more than the monthly wages of the people who served it. Serena recognized faces from magazines, from news broadcasts, from society pages. All of them here to celebrate a monster. Her father worked the room like the expert he was, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, playing the humble philanthropist. Serena stayed at his elbow, smiling when appropriate, speaking minimally. The perfect daughter, performing for the perfect audience. At 7:30, dinner was served. Serena sat at the head table, between her father and a city councilman who spent the entire meal talking about himself. She picked at expensive food and tried to calm her racing heart. The speech was coming. After the speech, the evidence would go live. Dominic had explained the plan during her last in-person briefing. Claire had compiled everything, all the recordings, all the documents, all the evidence of Richard Caldwell's crimes. At 8:15, 15 minutes into his speech about helping Miami's youth, every screen in the ballroom would switch from displaying photos of smiling children to displaying proof of what he really was. Audio recordings of him admitting to fraud, to murder, to trafficking, financial documents showing where the foundation's money actually went, and Serena's testimony, recorded beforehand, explaining who her father was behind closed doors. The truth, undeniable, and witnessed by 500 people who couldn't unhear it. At 8, her father took the stage to thunderous applause. Serena watched from her seat, the wire still recording, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Richard began, his voice warm and genuine sounding. 30 years ago, I started the Caldwell Foundation with a simple mission, to help the children of Miami reach their full potential. Tonight, I'm thrilled to announce our newest initiative. Serena's phone buzzed in her clutch. A text from Claire. Problem. Someone's jamming the signal. Screens won't switch. Need backup plan. Ice flooded her system. The plan was failing. Her father would give his speech, accept his accolades, and walk away unscathed. All those recordings, all that evidence, useless if it couldn't be seen. Her father continued speaking, talking about youth housing and second chances. Words that would sound beautiful if you didn't know they were lies wrapped around plans for exploitation. Serena looked around the ballroom. 500 people, all watching the stage, all believing the performance. She thought about the girls in those photographs, the invisible ones, the ones whose stories would stay hidden if she didn't act. Her father always said she was weak, incompetent, too scared to challenge him. He was wrong. Serena stood. Chairs scraped as heads turned toward her, confusion rippling through the crowd. On stage, her father paused mid-sentence, his expression darkening. "Serena, sit down." She didn't sit. Instead, she walked toward the stage on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The room went silent, hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. "Serena." Her father's voice was dangerous now. "This is not the time for one of your episodes." She climbed the steps to the stage, faced him, faced the room full of witnesses. "You're right," she said, her voice carrying through the microphone he'd left on. "This isn't the time for an episode. This is the time for truth." His hand moved toward her. Automatic violence, instinctive control. She stepped back, and the movement was caught by every camera in the room. "You want to hit me?" she said clearly. "That's what you always do when I don't behave exactly how you want. When I speak without permission. When I exist in ways that inconvenience you." "You're hysterical." "Marcus, remove her." "I'm not hysterical, I'm angry. There's a difference." Serena turned to face the audience. These people in their expensive clothes who'd come to celebrate her father. My name is Serena Caldwell, and for 26 years I've been my father's best-kept secret. Not his daughter, his victim. Do you know what it's like to grow up being beaten for imaginary infractions? To learn that love and violence are the same thing? To be sold to a criminal organization because you were worth more as a debt payment than as a human being? The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, shocked exclamations. Behind her, her father grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. Enough! She yanked free. No, not enough, not nearly enough. Because while I was surviving his abuse, learning to hide bruises and lie about accidents, he was building this. She gestured to the banner behind them, the foundation's logo, smiling children, promises of hope. A charitable organization that exists primarily to launder money and provide cover for criminal operations. Don't believe me? Ask Marcus Pemberton about cross-border fund transfers. Ask Catherine Torres about what her hotels are really used for. Ask my father about the dock supervisor who was killed for asking questions about shipments through Port Everglades. Richard's face had gone purple with rage. You stupid! Ungrateful. I have recordings, Serena said, speaking over him. Weeks of them. My father admitting to fraud, to conspiracy, to murder. Discussing plans to exploit vulnerable teenagers through his youth housing initiative. All of it documented, all of it real. And the only reason you're not hearing them right now is because someone in this room is jamming the signal that was supposed to broadcast the evidence. She looked directly at Marcus Pemberton, saw him pale, saw Catherine Torres already moving toward the exit. But it doesn't matter if you hear them now or later. The FBI will hear them. The media will hear them. And every single person in this room will remember this moment, when Richard Caldwell's perfect image shattered in front of Miami's elite, when his daughter stood up and told the truth he spent millions trying to hide. Security was moving now, coming for her. Serena saw Dominic in the crowd, already on his feet, already moving to intercept. Her father lunged for her, and this time she didn't step back. She stood her ground as his hand raised, as 500 people watched him prove everything she'd just said. His fist never connected. Dominic was there, faster than she'd thought possible, catching her father's arm in a grip that made Richard cry out. That's enough, Dominic said quietly. Then, louder to the room, I'm Dominic Valenti. Some of you know who I am. The rest will figure it out. I have copies of every recording Serena mentioned. They've already been forwarded to federal prosecutors, to media outlets, to anyone who might give a damn about the truth. You want to know what Richard Caldwell really is? Stick around. The show's just getting started. The ballroom descended into chaos. People shouting, cameras flashing, security unsure who to detain. Through it all, Serena stood on that stage and felt something she'd never experienced before. Freedom. She'd done it. Not the way they'd planned, but she'd done it. The truth was out, witnessed and undeniable, and her father couldn't hit her, or silence her, or make her disappear because the whole world was watching. Federal agents arrived within minutes. Claire had apparently called them the second Serena stood up. They led her father away in handcuffs while cameras captured every second. His face was twisted with rage and disbelief, and as they passed, he hissed at her. You're dead. You understand? Dead. No, Serena said clearly. I'm finally alive. You're the one who's finished. Dominic's hand found hers, steady and grounding. We need to get you out of here. She nodded, let him guide her through the chaos toward an exit. Behind them, the ballroom full of Miami's elite grappled with the truth they'd just witnessed, that the man they'd celebrated was a monster, and his daughter had been brave enough to expose him. In the car, finally alone, Serena started shaking. All the adrenaline, all the fear she'd been suppressing hit at once. Dominic pulled her against him and let her fall apart. You did it, he said into her hair. You were incredible, terrifying, but incredible. The plan failed. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't watch him lie to all those people and do nothing. So you improvised, stood up in front of 500 witnesses and told the truth. He pulled back to look at her. Do you have any idea how brave that was? I was terrified. I know, that's what made it brave. Her phone buzzed. Claire. Every major news outlet in Florida has the recordings. FBI confirmed they're opening immediate investigation. You're safe. He can't touch you now. Safe. The word felt foreign, impossible. But looking at Dominic, feeling the solid reality of his presence, Serena thought maybe it could be true. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we make sure every piece of evidence gets to the right people. We protect the victims he hasn't destroyed yet, and you—" Dominic's expression softened. "You get to figure out who you are when you're not surviving him." Who was she without her father's violence defining her? Without fear as her constant companion? Without the need to make herself small and invisible? Serena didn't know. But for the first time in her life, she had the freedom to find out. The media firestorm started before they even left the parking lot. News vans were already positioning themselves outside the hotel, satellite dishes blooming like mechanical flowers, hunting for signal. Dominic's driver took a route that avoided the main exits, but Serena could see the glow of camera lights reflecting off buildings as they passed. "It's going to get worse before it gets better," Dominic said, watching her watch the chaos. "Every outlet in the country is going to want your story. The prosecutors will want testimony. His lawyers will try to discredit you." "I know." She did know, intellectually. But knowing and experiencing were different things. They returned to the estate and Serena changed out of the blue dress that had become evidence, that would probably be photographed and discussed and analyzed on cable news for weeks. She pulled on jeans and one of the soft sweaters from the closet, clothes that felt real in a way designer silk never had. Dominic was waiting in the library with 2 glasses of wine and an exhaustion that matched her own. "Claire called. The FBI wants to interview you tomorrow morning. They're fast-tracking the investigation given the public nature of the exposure." He handed her a glass. "Your father's being held without bail. They're charging him with fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and they're building the trafficking case." The other 3, Pemberton, Torres, Chen, were all picked up within an hour of leaving the gala. "Good." The word felt insufficient. "What about the victims? The girls in those photos?" "The FBI is working with trafficking task forces to identify and locate them. Some have been found already. Others—" His expression went dark. "Others might not be found alive. But at least now someone's looking. At least their disappearances won't be ignored anymore." Serena sat down heavily, the weight of everything settling into her bones. She'd exposed her father, started the process of justice, but she couldn't undo what had already been done. Couldn't bring back the ones who were already gone. "You can't save everyone," Dominic said quietly, reading her thoughts. "That's not failure. That's just reality." "It feels like failure." "I know. But you saved the ones who come after. The girls who would have been his next victims. The people who would have trusted his reputation and gotten destroyed by the truth underneath. You stopped that from happening." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to feel victorious instead of hollow. But mostly she just felt tired, like she'd been running for so long that stopping didn't feel like rest. It felt like collapse. The next morning brought federal agents and lawyers and questions that lasted 6 hours. Serena sat in a conference room at the FBI's Miami field office and told her story to people who took notes and recordings and promised justice. She handed over everything, the wire recordings, the documentation Dominic had compiled, her own testimony about years of abuse that suddenly had legal relevance beyond just her personal trauma. "Your father's attorneys are arguing that you're a mentally unstable woman with a grudge," the lead prosecutor told her bluntly. "They're going to paint you as unreliable, emotionally compromised, possibly delusional. We need you to be prepared for that." "I am prepared. I've been called worse by the man who raised me." The prosecutor, a woman named Janet Rivera with sharp eyes and sharper suits, smiled grimly. "Good, because this is going to be brutal. He's going to use every resource he has left to destroy your credibility." "Let him try. I have recordings of him admitting to crimes. I have witnesses who heard him threaten my life. What I don't have is a reason to lie." Serena met Janet's eyes. "He spent my whole life making me feel worthless. Now he gets to find out what worthless actually looks like. Him, stripped of money and power and reputation, facing consequences for the first time in his entitled life." Janet's smile shifted to something more genuine. "I think we're going to work well together." The legal process was slow and frustrating in ways Serena hadn't anticipated. Her father's arrest was just the beginning. There were hearings and motions and procedural battles that seemed designed to delay justice rather than deliver it. But Janet was relentless, building a case that used Richard Caldwell's own words against him. and slowly the evidence pile grew too large to dismiss or explain away. 3 weeks after the gala, Serena sat in Dominic's office, the real one, in the basement, and watched news coverage of her father's arraignment. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, his silver hair uncombed and his face drawn. The man who'd once seemed like a giant now looked like what he actually was, a criminal facing consequences. "Marcus Pemberton took a plea deal," Dominic said, reading from his phone. "He's testifying against your father in exchange for reduced charges. Catherine Torres is doing the same. David Chen's fighting it, but his lawyers are already positioning for damage control. They're all turning on him. That's what happens when the person at the center of the conspiracy loses power. Everyone scrambles to save themselves." He set his phone down. "Your father built his empire on fear and leverage. Now he has neither, and the people he controlled are running for the exits." It should have felt satisfying. Instead, it just felt inevitable, like watching a structure that had always been unstable finally collapse under its own weight. "The foundation's being dissolved," Dominic continued. "Assets are being seized to compensate victims where possible. The properties he was planning to use for youth housing are being repurposed, actually legitimately this time, run by organizations that care about helping kids instead of exploiting them. That's something, at least. It's more than something. It's a whole system being dismantled because you were brave enough to speak up." He moved to sit beside her. "You changed things, Serena. Permanently." She wanted to believe that. Wanted to feel like the damage had been worth it. But mostly, she felt numb, disconnected from the victory everyone kept telling her she'd won. The trial started in late spring, 3 months after the gala. Serena testified for 2 days, walking the jury through a lifetime of abuse while her father sat at the defense table and stared at her with eyes full of hatred. His lawyers tried every tactic, questioned her memory, suggested she was vindictive, implied she was mentally unstable. She answered every question with calm precision, refusing to be shaken. On the second day, they played the recordings. Hours of Richard Caldwell's voice, admitting to fraud and conspiracy and murder, discussing the exploitation of vulnerable people like it was just business. The jury listened in silence, and Serena watched their expressions shift from skepticism to horror to disgust. When the tape of him threatening to kill her for the insurance money played, several jurors looked at him with something that might have been revulsion. "That's my daughter you're hearing," the prosecutor said during closing arguments. "A woman he raised, supposedly loved, definitely controlled. And he's discussing her death like it's a financial transaction. That's who Richard Caldwell is when he thinks no one's listening. Someone who sees people as assets to be used or discarded based on their value to him." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, the foreman read guilty verdicts on 17 counts: fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, solicitation of murder. Everything except the trafficking charges, which were still being built as more victims were identified. Her father showed no emotion when the verdicts were read, just sat there, blank-faced, while the life he'd built disintegrated around him. Sentencing came a month later. The judge gave him 40 years, effectively life for a man in his 60s. As he was led away, Richard Caldwell looked at Serena one last time, not with hatred now, but with something worse: dismissal. Like even now, facing prison for the rest of his life, she still didn't matter enough to warrant his emotion. It was the last time she saw him. She didn't attend his transfer to federal prison, didn't follow the news about his appeals. That chapter was closed, and she had no interest in giving him any more of her attention. What she did instead was harder and more meaningful. She started building something new. The idea came to her one afternoon while sorting through legal documents in Dominic's library. There were files on properties that had been seized from her father's estate, including the house where she'd grown up. The house where she'd learned that home and prison could be the same thing. "What happens to this place?" she asked Dominic, holding up the property deed. "It'll be auctioned eventually. Proceeds go to victim compensation funds. I want to buy it." He looked at her like she'd suggested setting herself on fire. "Why would you want that house, after everything that happened there?" "Because it shouldn't stay what he made it. It should become something better." The idea was crystallizing as she spoke. A place for people escaping situations like mine. Somewhere safe while they figure out what comes next. A shelter. More than that. A place where people can heal, get resources, learn they're worth more than what their abusers told them. She met his eyes. I can't undo what happened to me, but I can maybe prevent it from happening to someone else, or at least give them a safe place to land when they finally get away. Dominic studied her for a long moment. You're serious about this? Completely. Then I'll help you make it happen. It took 8 months to transform her father's estate into the Caldwell House, a name she kept deliberately, reclaiming it from the man who'd made it a place of fear. The renovations were extensive, turning formal dining rooms into common spaces, converting bedrooms into private suites where residents could lock their doors and actually feel safe. The office where her father had conducted his criminal business became a resource center with computers and legal aid information and counselors who understood trauma. Maria came with the house, choosing to stay on as house manager. Victor became head of security, his kindness now directed toward protecting people who needed it instead of just maintaining a crime lord's property. This feels right, Maria said on opening day, watching the first residents arrive. Making something good out of something terrible. Your mother would have been proud. The mention of her mother, gentle, broken, unable to save either of them, hit differently now. Serena could feel compassion for that woman without excusing her complicity. Could understand that some people survived by staying small while others survived by fighting back. Both were valid. Both were hard. Dominic attended the opening ceremony but stayed in the background, letting Serena have the spotlight. She'd worried about the optics, a shelter funded partially by a crime lord's money, but he'd been pragmatic about it. I'm going legitimate, he'd told her months earlier. Slowly, carefully, but it's happening. My grandfather had a code and I'm going back to it. No more borderline operations, no more working with people like your father. I've spent 15 years in this business. That's long enough. What will you do instead? Invest in things that actually matter. Support organizations like yours. Use the money I made doing questionable things to do something unquestionably good. He'd smiled. Consider it my redemption arc. She'd laughed at that, but she'd also believed him. Dominic was someone who kept his promises, even the ones that cost him. The shelter served 20 residents in its first year, providing temporary housing and resources to people escaping domestic violence, human trafficking, and homelessness. Serena hired counselors and case managers, people who understood trauma because they'd survived it themselves. She worked with legal aid organizations to help residents navigate protection orders and custody battles and all the complicated systems that victims had to face while trying to rebuild their lives. And slowly, carefully, she started to heal herself. Therapy was harder than exposing her father had been. Sitting in an office talking about feelings and childhood trauma felt ridiculous compared to standing on a stage and destroying a criminal empire. But her therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, insisted that both things were necessary. You've dealt with the external threat, Dr. Chen said during one session. Your father can't hurt you anymore. But the internal threat, the voice in your head that sounds like him, that tells you you're worthless, that's the harder battle. That's the one that takes time. It did take time. There were days when Serena felt strong, capable, proud of what she'd built. And there were days when she heard her father's voice telling her she was stupid, worthless, that everything good in her life would eventually be taken away because she didn't deserve it. Those days are normal, Dr. Chen assured her. Healing isn't linear. You're going to have setbacks, moments when the old programming kicks in. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. Dominic was patient through all of it, the good days and the bad ones, the moments when she was confident, and the moments when she fell apart for no reason she could articulate. Their relationship had shifted over the months, from partnership to something deeper, something that looked like love, though neither of them had said the word yet. You don't have to fix yourself to be worth caring about, he told her one night when she'd apologized for crying over something trivial. You're worth it broken, healing, whole, or anywhere in between. That's a very therapy-approved thing to say. I've been seeing someone too. Turns out running a criminal empire and then trying to go straight comes with its own set of issues. He pulled her closer. We're both works in progress. That's okay. A year after her father's conviction, Serena stood in the garden of the Caldwell house and watched residents plant vegetables in beds that used to hold her father's carefully manicured roses. One of them, a girl named Maya, who'd escaped a trafficking situation not unlike what Richard Caldwell had facilitated, was laughing at something another resident had said. The sound was bright and genuine, the kind of laughter that came from feeling safe enough to experience joy. "This is good work you're doing," a voice said behind her. Serena turned to find Janet Rivera, the prosecutor who'd built the case against her father. They'd stayed in touch, Janet occasionally referring victims to the shelter, Serena sometimes testifying in cases that needed someone who understood the dynamics of abuse. "Thank you. How's the trafficking case coming?" "We've identified 14 victims so far. 3 of them are willing to testify. It's enough to add charges, extend his sentence." Janet's expression was grim satisfaction. "He's going to die in prison, and he's going to spend the rest of his life knowing his daughter is the one who put him there." "I didn't put him there. His choices did." "Fair point. But you made sure those choices had consequences. That counts for something." After Janet left, Serena sat on the bench hidden behind Jasmine, the same spot where she'd cried a year ago, overwhelmed and lost. Now she sat in the same place and felt something different. Not happiness, exactly. Peace was too simple a word. But maybe something like acceptance. Acceptance that her father had been a monster, that her childhood had been stolen, that she'd carry scars from it forever. An acceptance that she'd survived. More than survived. She'd fought back and won, had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her, and transformed it into something that helped others. Her phone buzzed. Dominic. "Dinner tonight? I'm cooking." "You can't cook." "I can now." Took lessons. Prepare to be moderately impressed. She smiled, typing back. "I'll be home by 7. Home. The word felt different now. It didn't mean the estate where she'd learned to hide bruises. It meant Dominic's place, where she'd been staying more often than not, where she had her own space and her own key, and the freedom to come and go as she pleased. That evening, she drove through Miami as the sun set, painting the city in shades of orange and pink. The news still occasionally ran stories about Richard Caldwell, updating the public on his appeals and his health, and the ongoing investigations into his criminal network. Serena had learned to tune them out. He didn't get to be the story of her life anymore. Dominic's cooking turned out to be better than expected. Pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy but competent. They ate on the terrace overlooking the gardens, talking about the shelter and his legitimate business ventures, and a documentary filmmaker who wanted to interview Serena about her story. "Are you going to do it?" Dominic asked. "I don't know. Part of me thinks my story could help people understand what abuse looks like behind closed doors. But another part just wants to move forward, stop reliving the past. Both impulses are valid. That's what Dr. Chen says." Serena set down her fork. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you regret it? Helping me, I mean. You could have just let my father's debt go, avoided all this mess. Instead, you got involved in federal investigations, exposed your own business practices, completely restructured your life." Dominic was quiet for a moment, considering. "No, I don't regret it. Helping you was the first unambiguously good thing I'd done in years. Maybe ever. It reminded me that I could be something other than what my business made me." "You were always more than that." "Maybe. But I'd forgotten." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "You saved me as much as I saved you. We saved each other." It was the truest thing either of them had said. 2 years after the gala, Serena received word that her father had died in prison. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. She felt nothing when she heard. No grief, no relief, just a kind of blank acknowledgement that the man who'd hurt her no longer existed in the world. "You okay?" Dominic asked when she told him. "I think so. Is that weird, that I don't feel anything?" "No. You mourned who he should have been a long time ago. The man who died in prison was a stranger who happened to share your DNA." She thought about that, about how she'd spent years wishing for a father who loved her, who protected her, who saw her as valuable, and how she'd had to accept that person never existed, that the man who raised her was incapable of that kind of love. "I'm not going to the funeral," she said. "Good. He doesn't deserve your presence, even in death." The Caldwell house held a different kind of memorial, a ceremony for survivors, acknowledging the end of one source of harm in the world, Residents and staff gathered in the garden and spoke about resilience, about healing, about the fact that abusers didn't get to write the ending of their victims' stories. He tried to make me invisible, Serena said to the group. Tried to convince me I was worthless, that my only value was in how well I served his needs. He failed. I'm standing here, visible and valued, running an organization that directly contradicts everything he believed about power and control. That's my victory. Not his death, but my life. The applause was quiet but genuine. These were people who understood that survival was its own form of triumph, that simply continuing to exist in the face of trauma was an act of resistance. After the ceremony, Maya approached her, the girl who'd been laughing in the garden a year ago, who was now preparing to move into her own apartment with support from the shelter's transitional program. I wanted to thank you, Maya said. Not just for the shelter, but for showing me what fighting back looks like. I'm testifying next month against the people who trafficked me. I'm terrified, but I'm doing it anyway because you taught me that's what bravery is. Serena hugged her, this girl she barely knew but understood completely. You're going to be amazing, and whatever happens, you're not alone. Neither are you. It was true. Serena wasn't alone anymore. She had the shelter staff, who'd become family. She had residents who trusted her with their stories. She had Dr. Chen helping her navigate the complicated work of healing. She had Claire, who still checked in monthly to make sure she was okay. She had Maria and Victor, who'd chosen to stay even when the house changed purposes. And she had Dominic, who taught her that protection could exist without control, that strength could be gentle, that love didn't have to hurt. 3 years after the gala, Dominic asked her to marry him. They were in the library, their library now, full of books they'd collected together, and he was nervous in a way she'd never seen him. I know marriage probably feels complicated for you, he said, holding a ring that was simple and beautiful, given what your parents' marriage looked like. But I want you to know that what I'm offering isn't ownership or control. It's partnership. It's choosing to build a life together while remaining whole, separate people. I know what you're offering. Serena took the ring, studied it, and yes, obviously yes. Obviously? Did you think I'd say no? I thought you might need time to think about it, to process the implications, and she kissed him, cutting off the nervous rambling. When she pulled back, he was smiling. So that's a yes? That's a yes. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that was small and private, just the people who mattered. No society photographers, no elaborate production, nothing that resembled her father's carefully curated image management. Just Serena and Dominic and the family they'd chosen, celebrating a commitment built on honesty instead of performance. The Caldwell house continued to grow. By year 5, they'd expanded to include job training programs, legal advocacy, and partnerships with organizations serving trafficking victims. Serena hired staff who'd survived similar situations, people who understood that helping others heal was part of healing themselves. She also started speaking publicly about her experience, carefully and on her own terms. Not for documentary filmmakers or sensationalist media, but for conferences about domestic violence prevention, for training programs for social workers and law enforcement, for anyone who needed to understand that abuse hid in plain sight behind respectability and wealth. The thing people don't understand about abusers like my father, she told one audience, is that they're experts at maintaining public image. He was a philanthropist, a community leader, someone everyone respected. Behind closed doors, he was a monster. Both things were true simultaneously, and that's what makes these situations so difficult to identify and escape. The work was hard and often heartbreaking. There were residents they couldn't save, situations where intervention came too late, moments when Serena felt the weight of every story that ended badly. But there were also victories, people who left the shelter for safe housing, who pressed charges against their abusers, who built new lives free from violence. 7 years after destroying her father's empire, Serena stood in the same ballroom where she'd exposed him and gave a speech about trauma recovery to an audience of mental health professionals. The hotel had been reluctant to host her at first. The memories of that night were bad for business, but she'd insisted. Reclaiming the space where she'd fought back felt important. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened, she told the audience. After the speech, they walked through the hotel gardens where she'd once been broken and scared. "You've come a long way," he said. "We both have." It was true. Dominic had fully exited his criminal operations, was now running legitimate businesses and philanthropic ventures that his grandfather would have approved of. He served on the Caldwell House Board, used his connections to secure funding and partnerships, had become an advocate for criminal justice reform. "Think we're done rebuilding yet?" Serena asked. "I don't think we're ever done. I think we just keep building, keep changing, keep becoming better versions of ourselves." He pulled her close. "But if you're asking if we're happy, yeah, I think we are. Happy." The word felt both too simple and exactly right. Serena had spent so long believing happiness was something she didn't deserve, something reserved for people who weren't broken or damaged or carrying the weight of trauma. Now she understood that happiness wasn't a destination you reached after healing. It was something you could experience even while the work of healing continued. She thought about the girl who'd been delivered to a crime lord a decade ago, convinced she was going to die. That girl had been right about one thing. She had died in a way. The version of her that believed she deserved pain, that accepted violence as love, that made herself invisible to survive. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone stronger. Someone who'd learned that survival could be loud instead of quiet, that safety could be built instead of just hoped for, that the best revenge against people who tried to destroy you was becoming someone they never imagined you could be. The Caldwell house would outlive her, would help people long after she was gone. That felt like the truest victory, not just escaping her father's violence, but ensuring that others could escape too, building a legacy of healing instead of harm. As evening fell over Miami, Serena and Dominic drove home through streets that felt different than they had 10 years ago. Or maybe the streets were the same and she was different, finally able to see beauty instead of just threat, possibility instead of just danger. Her phone rang. The shelter, a new resident who needed to talk. Serena answered, listening to a familiar story of escape and fear and hope, offering the reassurance that only someone who'd walked that path could provide. "You're safe now," she said, meaning it. "And tomorrow we'll start figuring out what comes next. But tonight, you just rest. You've earned it." After hanging up, she leaned back against the seat and watched the city pass by. Somewhere out there, her father's grave was already being forgotten, weeds probably growing over the headstone no one visited. And here she was, alive and purposeful, surrounded by people who chose to love her not despite her damage, but because they recognized their own. This was the ending her father had tried to prevent, not his destruction, though that had been satisfying, but her transformation. The invisible girl becoming visible, the victim becoming a survivor, becoming someone who helped others survive. She'd rewritten the story he'd tried to force her into, had taken every lie he'd told her about her worth, and proven it wrong by simply continuing to exist and thrive. That was the victory. Not revenge, though there had been that too. But this, building a life he'd said she didn't deserve, becoming someone he'd insisted she could never be, proving that his power over her had always been temporary and fragile and built on lies. Serena Caldwell was free. Not because her abuser was dead, though that helped, but because she'd chosen freedom over and over again, in small ways and large, until choosing it became who she was, instead of just what she did. And that choice, renewed daily in the face of trauma and doubt and all the voices that said she couldn't, that choice was unbreakable. She'd survived, she'd fought back, she'd won, and now she got to live.